Hi, my name is Jonathan Mark with Flyby News. This is an update of a Flyby News venture in dealing with Bart Jordan. Interviewed him in 2014 called Bart Jordan Time Singer and Manhattan Project. It was almost unbelievable information, and it did receive hundreds of views on YouTube. But to grok that incredible idea that an 8-year-old was contributing to the Manhattan Project, we need a lot more proof. And so we just recently recorded an interview for about 5 hours in Dover, New Hampshire with Bart Jordan using the facilities of the Dover Public Library. And we learned about his involvement not just on the Manhattan Project, but also in the Mars Viking 1 mission. Focus of this last presentation is mostly about the Cydonia region on Mars and the 35th orbit and the 72nd frame of the pictures that were taken by Mars Viking, and the 70th orbit and the 13th frame taking the same shot of the Cydonia region. Bart Jordan has shown that his formulas, his numbers 35, 72, and 7013 were critical for the NASA mission to reach this region. After 1976, the Mars observer was supposed to come through and observe, but that was crashed into the planet. So we're here to present the proof with mathematical data showing that 35, 72, and 7013 are in hundreds of formulas, and was given to NASA that used them, and in their pictures it says 7013 and 35A72. Bart Jordan published the distances of the 2 moons of Mars, the 2 satellites, Phobos and Deimos, to the center of the planet in the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1966 to 1973. This has been a main challenge of Flyby News when we were reporting him since 1999, saying that how did these numbers get into the Encyclopedia Britannica? Can anyone give us another explanation than the one that we received from Bart Jordan? In 17 years, there was no other explanation for how these numbers arrived. And Bart Jordan, in this interview, shares some of the history of how he got these numbers and this formula into the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I'll be showing an excerpt from this new upcoming program that should be completed by November 2016 at the latest. And that program will be for about 5 hours with a lot of data, a lot of information. And in this program, and this quick update for Flyby News, I'm also going to show the credits that we have so far in this program. It's not set in stone. This is still being going over and scrutinized by Bart Jordan and his colleagues. Besides that, Flyby News has been supporting Jill Stein for president in non-critical swing states. We're going to change our absolute support for her because Donald Trump has gotten to us. It would really harm our nation. And in critical swing states where somebody might need to vote for Hillary Clinton, I'm encouraging that. But in Massachusetts, and when the polls are supporting, the non-Trump presidency, I encourage people to vote for Jill Stein of the Green Party, because that's a future of a platform that we deserve. Hillary Clinton is proposing more of the same, and it could create more catastrophes. It's certainly the elites that have taken over our world since the JFK assassination. And we still haven't gotten our world back, but we're still working at it. So please enjoy this presentation, these excerpts, and the music, and the program with Bart Jordan and Mars Viking 1.
But the 35A72 should be stated for those who have no understanding of why it might be that. It would be the 35th orbit that is being cited, and the 72nd frame of that orbit. It then goes 35 orbits further, and now we are at orbit 70 and frame 13. The A simply means Viking 1. That's all the A means. But otherwise, it could just as easily be read 35.72 or 70.13, or altogether just 3572 and 7013. Those numbers are fine in and of themselves. In fact, they are what should be there. Those were not just photo images that were marked with convenient numbers. Oh no, those were orbital positions that the frames were following. Orbital positions. And that means, in effect, that you have to have a 0 point, and anything that follows from there has to be programmed according to a gridding of the planet which is already established. In other words, that's a cartographic necessity.
Right.
Otherwise, it would be sheer chaos. There's enough of that to go around. But anyway, the point is that the orbits in and of themselves had to have a centering for the vectors, the approach vectors. That's a tricky piece of business. And there had to be one image which was so powerfully stated, so easily seen from that distance of what they were from the surface of Mars, in order to apply the vector approach correctly. And that was a little bit out of sync with what's here. The face happened to be along with that as a point, and I'm not going to argue with the figure. I'm simply going to say that that's not the real issue. The real issue is what is it that's common to 35A72 and 70A13 that was a powerful enough vector locator. You have to think of it this way. What is it the real estate people say? Location is everything? Something like that. Location, location, location is everything. And in this case, the point of approach had to be on an object, as I say, so powerfully positioned that it could not be other than the centering issue. Not in the center, but the centering issue for the vectors. And that was a 5-sided pyramid, which I guarantee you nature doesn't make. Nothing 5-sided in nature is 5-sided that I know of, especially not that massive. It would cover the entire Giza Plateau and all the pyramids within. The point is, that was at 40.87 north. 40.87. Now, that is what lies between the 3572 and on the other side, the 7013. But those numbers also are involved in hundreds of equations, just as they are, either with the decimal point in the center or no decimal point at all, depending upon the use. But the important point here is that even so, along came someone into one of the reporters' lives and said, oh, it's not 40.87, it's 40.868. Don't shy from this point, please. This is a deliberate distortion. Let's call it for what it is.
Well, the Wikipedia claimed it was 40.75.
For the face, but we're not talking about the face. We're talking about the apex of the 5-sided pyramid.
I
the
understand.
Apex.
That's this. That's
Yes, but the wrongful thing was to come along and say, no, it's not 40.87, it's 40.868.
Yeah.
Because any school child should know, beyond the age of 3, or 3rd grade, start again, that the 8 would kick the 6 up to 7 anyway. That's not the point. What is the 4087 doing? Well, coming from the sun side, couldn't you read that as 7804? Of course you could. And the synodic revolution of the planet Mars from Earth's position is 780 days. Till it comes back to the same place in the sky. And what planet is it? It's number 4. So, of course, the license plate could read 7804. So what's better than to locate the vector at 4 point, or 4087 rather, obviously. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more clear statement on the part of an ancient culture.
And
Leading you to
was
the
it
right
in the
place.
languages that these numbers came to you when you first discovered that north marker?
Not really. That just came from being what I am, a samanamas, and I was a child with this particular channel capacity. And the samanamas is a word that no longer exists in Greek. Hasn't existed for a long time, but that's what Homer was. And that's what many other people were, that were part of the science and the music systems and the language systems and so on. But no, I just received it as it was. And I received the image when I was 5 years old. I saw the entire Sidonian site in its pristine form before any damage, and that was selective damage, was done. That was an extraordinary sight. I'll never forget it. It was beautiful beyond description. Now, all I'm saying is that I had it given me, just like the 3572 was given me, the 7013 was given me. I was nothing but the messenger writing it down as it came, without the least bit of understanding of what the hell it was. And I'm afraid that much of what I took down was exactly that way. The frequencies and the alphabets are a thing apart, but they're connected. They're just not in that particular calculation. What this was simply, flatly, a place in the latitude, regardless of what would be east or west of that. It was still north 40.87. And knowing that, I realized that here we have something that's a direct statement of some persons who came from Earth. That's right, they weren't aliens. They were now in an alien world. They were at Mars, putting up some things that were sign significant that they came from Earth, but they were Earthlings looking back at Earth, looking at them. And it was a way of saying, this is where we've come because we know something is happening here that must be recorded for the family of man. So that's where that began. And the important point of that is, again, let me stress it. You had Earth's people doing this from the standpoint that would not reflect what you would see from Mars. It's rather what you would see from Earth if you were looking at Mars. And nothing like a mirror. It works wonders. You don't see anything but yourself. And when they went to the second stage of the dream, which was sometime later, I think it was maybe a fortnight apart, something like that. 14 days, I'm sorry. Something like that. But remember, I'm a 5-year-old child. I don't remember everything. The time out of mind, in this case, was close enough for me to have in the second dream I received as this Samanamas. By the way, the word shaman descends from that in a Siberian form. Saman namas. You can hear it's a palindrome. But the version that everybody knows is shaman, which is like, a medicine man or priest or whatever. It's descended from there. the important point here is the second one I saw what I came to think of as a deliberately damaged site. Let's repeat that. Deliberately, selectively destroyed in parts. But the rest that were in pristine shape, like that 3-wall version, is perfect in itself. The top wall is a sea mile at 6,080. Omega, less than that, 800, less than that, is the land mile at 5280. And then 800 less than that is the birth mile, 4480. And the birth mile was so called because it was the one that was hanging down, and it was also the distance a woman had to walk when she was pregnant to help with the lightning before the birth and before the breaking of the water. And they damaged that wall. It was a nuclear strike from the air. It is not damage that occurred by somebody just blowing up portions of the wall. No. And the blast shadow next to it was an identical image of the thing which is embraced by that wall next door to it, which is the alpha, that's an A, mu, that's an M, omega, which is the open O with feet, so to speak. And that's the mother, in a sense. But the alpha, mu, omega is also the basis for the Greek alphabet. Because it's there that you have the frequencies of the alphabet, which are mainstay, where the octaves occur, 2 octaves apart. I had nothing to do with the Hiroshima except to supply the correct atomic weight for the 235, which appears that way in nature. And that was a case of symmetrical resonance. Reciprocal resonance, rather. The point was that, going back to what you were asking about, I had to show Dr. Wood that I had already considered the source, in a sense of Mars being the source, and I had placed the innermost moon at 5,820 miles from the center of Mars. I saw what the ancients were trying to do. We knew that the land mile had 5,280 feet to the mile, and I saw the best way they could do the thing, like my mother from time to time, because I was called Bart. My father was Bert, so I had to do something. So I also noticed that my mother sometime would shift the A and the R. So what would emerge was not Bart, but Brat. So she didn't do it very often, but I caught the idea. So that made me think, well, maybe what the Greeks are trying to put across is the 5280 is actually now 5820 times the 5280. They've changed the inner numbers, but they've kept the distance factor so that we can know what measure there is. So then I said that I figured that the outer moon was 14,615 miles from the center of Mars. He said, that seems to be very reasonable. Very reasonable. I don't remember what it was thought to be, but that seems very reasonable. What else? And I said, well, Dr. Wood, what I've been challenged on in terms of the use of mile and kilometer is that they're 2 disparate systems. They can be compared, but only through the conversion between them. So he said, well, what have you done with the challenge? I said, that's simple. I just set it up the way I thought it was. The British foot was not really British. The French meter was not really French. They were inherited measures from the Greek, because it was there a long time before it ever found its way to Britain or found its way to France. And I said, I'm helped in this by the fact that the British foot really comes from the solar year. He said, what? I said, you heard me. Solar year. That's the basis. And the French meter, said he. I said, yes, that comes from the lunar year. He said, oh, now I've heard it all. What do you mean? How is that possible? I said, well, you take 10 solar years at 365.24, just advance it by 10, or 2 times 5. In other words, the 2 hands and the 5 fingers on each. Because that's man doing the count, like counting hands on a horse, same idea. I said, and then the monkey in the middle there is going to be pi. Which pi? I said 3.1416. He said, so you agree with that? I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's absolutely standard. Nothing wrong with it. He said, well, how did you achieve the understanding of that? I said, well, I didn't do it the way you're supposed to do it. I took 22. Well, first of all, I took 3.1416, and I decided if 3 plus 1 plus 4 plus 1 plus 6 is 15, well, somehow between 22 and 7, the 22 over 7, there had to be somebody that said a minus 5, and then a minus 5, and a minus 5 coming to the 15. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, 22 minus 5 is 17, and 17 minus 5 is 12, and 12 minus 5 again is 7. He said, so what? I said, well, 22 times 17 times 12 times 7 is 31416. All you have to do is put a decimal point in each one of those, 4, and you've got 3.1416. I've never seen that, said Dr. Wood. I've never seen that. Do you realize that you have just given the most simple formula that has ever been devised for pi? I said, no, doctor, I'm not aware of that, but thank you for telling me. Because now I know that I have some reason to suggest that that's the way it was used over and over again before it became standardized at or written out as 3.1416. So anyway, what you do is you take the solar year 10 times, you divide it by that pi of 31416, and then you divide it again by the solar year. The lunar year, I'm sorry. And he said, and I said, it's 3.280823. He said, that's palindromic. My God, that's palindromic. And of course, that's clear proof that conversion that we've always used at 3.2808 and chopped off the 23 is proof that the systems were made at the same time. And you're right. The inheritors are the French and the English. You don't have any idea what you've done, have you? And I said, not really. I was just trying to search for some answer as to what the Greeks were saying and why they did what they did. That's all. And so he said, all right, tell me more. What do you take the size of the Earth to be? I said, palindromically? Oh, I know what the Greeks said. I can't tell you if they're right or not, but I think they must be. It's 131,484,131 feet. So the 131 is on either side of the center, and the only thing that changes throughout is the center. He said, well, what's the median measure? What's the middle measure? I said, oh, that's the one that gives the rise to the whole thing. That's 262. And 262 by half is 131. And then 222,000 less than that, just as with the first being less than the 484 rather. Same thing, that's 131,040,131. He said, so you just told me right now that the basic Earth is 24,902, 24,816, and 24,818. I don't think anything could be any different than that. That's beautiful. I said, yes, but it's Greek. It's not the nations that have carried the banner for, and we have to give them credit for doing that, the metric system and the English foot. But certainly it puts to rest the idea that some great British brute, royal brute, put his foot down and said, that's my foot, because it's not true.
Well, how did you calculate the moons of Mars, and why is that proves that it was a design, because it looks like it's a design, controlled situation, that the moons one's going in one direction, the other one's going the other.
Right.
But you had this published in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but when did it come to you and how did you get it into the encyclopedia?
Well, that's where we go back to the origin of the thing that I was telling Dr. Wood, because it had happened earlier than that.
Yeah.
I did it when I was 5, because I didn't know any better. Nobody said you're not supposed to be able to do this, you're not supposed to even try. So I simply said, okay, well then let me see what the conversion leads me to in terms of the kilometer. So that meant that the 5820 in terms of miles was answered by 9366 kilometers for Phobos, the innermost moon of Mars, and the outermost, Deimos, the 14,615 was answered by 23,520 kilometers. And then I noted right away that 9366 plus the outer one, 23,520, differed from the combination of miles as miles, 14,615 plus 5,820, by 12,451, which was exactly half the Earth's circumference at the equator. You couldn't ask for a more clear statement. Only half the world can look at half the heavens at one time. It was over and done. I knew right then and there what it was, and Dr. Wood saw that and he said, it's got to be it. It has to be it. Who knows this? And I said, well, one of my grandfather's former clients. I can't remember his name right now, but I'm terrible with names, Dr. Wood. Honestly, I would maybe call you Dr. Tree the next time. I'd make the association, but that's as far as I'd go. I said, he's a client of my grandfather's, I know, but because of the stock market and other things, I think the shop was closed, back in the 30s sometime. But he worked at the Lick Observatory, and there was an astronomer there named Hammond Wright, who was very interested in the measures that I gave for the Martian moons, kilometer and mile, to this astronomer who was a former client of my grandfather's.
Oh.
And he said, oh, Hammond Wright, I know the name. He's a very honorable gentleman. Did you attach any concerns to the publication or anything? I said, no, just that they be published together. He said, for such small moons, that's unlikely to happen. He said, I will call Dr. Wright, and I will put it to him, since he is one of the great Mars experts. If it's going to be published anywhere, that's the way it has to be. And as far as the measures of the dimensions of the Martian moons, which, by the way, it was thought by Hammond Wright that that was going a step too far. He did not put that in the boxes, because that would preempt, if it were true, it would preempt the need of NASA having to determine or confirm. Very smart move on his part. But he had them, and he knew I did it, and he knew I had a formula for it. Hammond Wright and I eventually did talk with each other, or speak with each other. And I was, of course, very respectful of his work because I knew how wonderful an astronomer he had been. But he never lived to see the project's real thrust, unfortunately. Now, what they did, which was really dastardly, the Russians had a program, Phobos. They wanted to get close enough to that asteroid to determine something about its origin. They wanted to get close enough, possibly to land on it even, but certainly not smash into it. The Russians were given measures, and they were said to be mine. The Russians thought they could depend on that. Their mission was deliberately destroyed. And our guys were looking right at their consoles and watching it happen.
And tell us about when you heard about that.
Some years had passed, I can't remember how many. I try not to think of these things.
That's why you have me around.
Yeah, but some years had passed and there was a big meeting at MIT. And at the last minute somebody called me and said, Bart, would you please come because there are some Russians that would like to talk to you. I said, well, I'd come anyway. We were invited, but nobody did that. I said, well, I'm doing it now. Hop a bus, come on down, if you can do it tomorrow. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. So I went down to MIT, and indeed, the Russians that were there, one of them very senior, came over and said, Mr. Jordan, I'd like to ask you a question. Why did you deliberately furnish us with false measures that ended up in the destruction and the loss of the mission? I said, sir, I wouldn't do such a thing. Can you furnish me with those numbers? Yes, I have them here. I was going to ask you to sign them. I said, sign them? For what purpose? He said, because if they're your measures, I'd like you to indicate that. I looked at the numbers, I said, not a one of them is within a, never mind country mile, try a continent. I said, no, there's no comparison between these numbers and mine. Who gave you these? He said, NASA. And they sat right there at the consoles and looked at the whole thing happening and just didn't even crack a smile or anything and just sat there deadpan, in effect. And then they said, oh, isn't it too bad? This guy gave us the measures, but, you know, I told you he was unreliable, turning to a colleague or something like that, you know, and they heard all that, they documented all that. So I said, well, actually, no, mine are in Britannica, and they've been there since '66. He said, they're in Britannica? What are they doing in Britannica? I said, due to Hammond Wright, an ancient astronomer, who's been gone now for a bit, but he put them in there, and he kept his word. The kilometers and miles are recorded correctly. And I said, and there's no notice of their being mined, since the data taken mostly from the Naval Almanac or something such as that. Mm-hmm. And I said, but that's what, you know, I wanted. I've never wanted anybody to know what I was doing, that I was doing. I wanted the information out there, not concentration on me. I've had enough of celebrity. I've seen too much of it. I've been through too much of it. My mother was one. And when I was playing, I was one. And so on. And my work with Mother Goddess made even more of one. So much so that when I was in university, my art teacher said, Bart, you're the most active feminist I know. I could have gone through the floor. And the girls were laughing in the class. Some of the guys were smiling. I don't know where she came up with that, but I had just, you know, received quite a bit of notice for the fact of the Mother Goddess that I had reconstructed, the Le Poux statuette from southern France. I said, but I told the Russians, I said, no, my measures there, well, can you write them out for us and then sign it? I said, oh, certainly. Can you mount another mission? He said, not right away, but we'll try. It was a very expensive mission we lost, and it means a lot to us. So I put the figures down right there, and then I showed him the matter of the addition and whatnot. Right. I said, but no scientist even picked up on that. Well, we didn't even know they were there. We had no idea. And we didn't think to look because Britannica was usually quoting something from somewhere and it said Naval Almanac, probably, as you say. We don't know. I said, I don't remember. I never went into it that deeply. And he said, but, so you are not at fault. Excuse me a minute. And he came back and he said, my colleagues want to extend through me our deepest apology. Thank you for your forthrightness, your candor. Your countrymen don't really value what you've tried to do. We know that. We wish we had known more about it when you were in Russia. The only thing we knew was that you were a musician. It's apparently far more than that. I said, yes, but I try to stay under the radar for a lot of reasons. And not a little of it is because I don't like all of the stuff that happens between colleagues in the various fields that I do have contact with.
Well, we'll probably end this program with your remembrance piece. Can you talk about your creation of that music piece that is a memory of Rosalind?
Well, actually what happened there, it was the 18th of December, 1968. This is way off the subject of Mars and the like, but I was called suddenly by the executive secretary, not typist, but of the Guitar Society, Martha Nelson. A very tall, beautiful individual, looked a little bit like Celeste Holm, but even better looking, I think. And she was somebody who was a mainstay in the society, classical society, the classical guitar society in New York, Society of the Classical Guitar. I got it right eventually. And she called me and she said, Bart, the Waverly concert is supposed to be having its premiere performance with us, but the person that was supposed to play in terms of introducing this program before, in other words, another player before they're coming out, can't do it. I said, well, what is it you're asking from me? And she said, just come, but bring your guitar. So I said, okay, I got it. I got there, and not only was Segovia there, my teacher, but there was Saint de la Mata, Ray de la Torre, Mario Escudero. I mean, just about every bloody guitarist who was a great instrumentalist on his own was there, and the women were there that were good, and very good in some cases. And then there were also some of the jazz artists, band guitarists that I had amplified their techniques that played for ABC, NBC, CBS. They were there. I just threw up my hands. I said, Martha, I'm not prepared for this. And she said, you are. Just play. So I went up there, and Segovia was right in front of me by about 7 or 8 feet. And so it went on, and I'm looking out there at this august body of my peers, and I thought to myself, what do I do now? So I started to play a basic program, Greek, medieval, Renaissance stuff or whatever. And Maestro, after about 7 or 8 pieces, which was like about a third of the program, said, momento por favor, solamente improvisación. And so he said, moment please, just now, improvisation, only. Solamente. So I thought, oh my God. So I started to play with, that was the Portrait in D, and I had never played anything of any of them except the fourth one. Some bloke in the back said, and it was a distinctly British voice with the same kind of accent that Julian Bream had, and they were boyhood friends, and she, ballet antique, please, ballet antique. And so it was something which referred back to the time when I was called out to help with the situation. They were practicing a ballet, and they were in rehearsal. And this male dancer made these wide leaps and was always hitting the floor off the beat. And he was dancing with Margot Fonteyn, the head ballerina of the London Ballet. So she was glum coming out of that rehearsal, and the chorus girls loved her. So they came over to me and said, Bart, you got your guitar, please come in and entertain her in some way, make her feel good. So I came and I composed this little piece, and somehow the word got out. And so that's what this guy asked me. That was the one improv that I'd done before that I repeated. That's the fourth one. But then I played everything else just flat out. And so all I can say is that I was with one piece that celebrated my daughter, one that celebrated my son, you know, that was not unusual for me to do, and one with a portrait indeed starting for the whole family. And then other things came up, and I sort of celebrated certain people in my mind. Like Einstein, when I visited with him, after I was in that school that they sent me to, forced me to go to, of Loomis, which Loomis was a trustee, of course, and his stepsons went there. When I got there with the priest and the rabbi, who were friends, and they were both interested in science, tremendously so, and that was the basis for their friendship. One was a Catholic priest, the other was a rabbi. Both of them very young. I wouldn't go see Einstein when Lawrence wanted me to. No, I didn't want to go see him at all. He was a great man. No, no, no. But when this rabbi had a friend, excuse me, had his uncle rather, who was a friend of Einstein's, or an acquaintance at least, in some regard, that the invitation came that way, I sort of couldn't refuse these two very genuine people within their different faiths coming together. And that togetherness just brought me to my feet, and I said, okay, if I am to go there, I will. And so I went down with them. I was excused from the school. It was kept very secret. And I went down to visit him at IAS, that's the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton. And I was told the meeting was supposed to last 20 minutes to a half hour. We were together in that room for 6 hours with one glass of water between us. And that's the truth. One glass of water between us.
Drink to that.
I had come to the meeting with a 35-page paper, replete with footnotes, which I don't remember how many pages those were. He said, well, the main interest I have here in a moment is your velocity of light. Put it on the board, if you will. The moment I put 55, 88, 4 on the board over 3, he said, you don't have to tell me what you did. I know. And they couldn't have done it without you. They could not have done it without you.
So he knew about it.
Yeah. He said, I had a forecast of this paper, and he said, actually, I already had some abstracts from it. But the velocity of light was not one of them. Anyway, most of what Einstein had to say to me, he was more comfortable in German, and that was fine for me because I was fluent. What I think, though, that was most apparent to him was that my study of Aramaic had in it a potential for what came to be the investigative tools going into Viking. There's a word that they say is Hebrew. No, it's Aramaic. Even though the scholars have not hit upon that, it has to be Aramaic. The word is agmon, and the word is used to describe Moses and the bulrushes. So of course it has to be Hebrew. But no, it isn't. It's Aramaic. It's Chaldean. The point is that the frequencies of that, I could have brought them today, but I didn't. We can do that some other time. The frequencies involved there are pointedly Mars. You couldn't miss it. You got 780, you got 26 for iron. You've got exactly what was produced in, I made no mention of course, at the time, but in Nero, since you mentioned, it's exactly that same frame. Well, Einstein, when he saw that, he said, so the story itself is a way of preserving the idea that the cattail reed was not only related to what was used by the scribes to write, it was also because these are, how tall did you say? I said, on average, about 2.5 meters. He said, well, it'd take two of me, but, or something like that. But he said, so you're saying that those common reeds that grow in the swamps, which backs up the story of Moses and the bulrushes, that is actually not only related to the scribes, but it's also the unit of measure. I said, yes, and I suspect there's a site northeast of Mexico City called, by the Spaniards, because they had tin ears, Teotihuacan, but it's Teotihuacan, really. And I said, I suspect very roundly, because that means cattail reed in a sense, that it's also referred to as Nazarayos. He said, what, Nazarene? I said, that's correct. He said, but how could that be? And I said, well, Dr. Einstein, it comes from the fact that it was the Basque engineers that gave rise to that great complex. And they used to wear a scapula, more or less, I don't have it right here, but which represents this site. Much like priests wear scapulas now, but this was devoted to the goddess. And that's what the summary of those numbers are. He said, explain. So I launched into what I considered to be the model of what was on Mars, focused on a particular latitude, which was 4087. And I gave him my reasons for it. And he said, and you say you've seen this. I said, yes, sir, I have. And you've seen it in two conditions. Yes. One, beautiful beyond description. The other, damaged. But let me use the word selectively, because I think it applies. And these were nuclear strikes from the air. The other that was in great abundance was the destruction just done by the runaway condition of climate in the collapse of the atmosphere. So you have great piles of sand, you have wind blowing everywhere, and you probably have the onrush of water in various streams or with rivulets in the stream that came from such powerful destruction when the atmosphere collapsed. And he said, what are you telling me? I said, well, I guess I'm telling you that my life is probably going to be taken up with trying to make people aware that it's going to happen here. If we don't put these nuclear things away, doctor, we've got to put them away. And we've got to try to survive. Man is about the only creature I know of that actively fouls his nest. For what purpose? Everywhere you look. Everywhere you look. He said, I agree with you, little boy, but you know something? If you keep talking like this, you'll never reach manhood. They'll kill you. Because you know what you know, and they don't want you to say what you know. I said, well, sir, we've just come out of a war. A horrible event that took so many lives. And it's not just the 6 million Jews, 13 millions involved, or more. We don't really know the count, do we? And then there were the soldiers. The soldiers, who just do what they do because they're good citizens. And I said, you know, Caesar said something about, of course, in recent times, let's deal with Goethe. He said, in terms of Germans, he said, and he of course was one, he said, admirable in the individual, abominable in the mass. And he meant it. But I said, Dr. Einstein, you very well might relate to what Caesar said, because you do know that he went up against the Swiss cantons and Vercingetorix. He said, yes, I remember that from my school days. I said, well, he said there was one great flaw in the German character. It was the comitatus. He said, well, I don't really know Latin. And I said, it means commitment to the leader, sir. Commitment to the leader. And that's not just a flaw in German character. It's a flaw of humankind. But the flaw is generally governed by, again, money. He said, which is why we have that term or that statement about money is the root of all evil. It most certainly looks more and more like that as you speak. And I said, well, it can do wonderful things, but it can also be responsible for some horrible things. And you're right, I probably will be plagued for the rest of my days. That is so beautifully exercised, as you could show, in this case, the raising of a temple. And a tomahawk will bring it down. So man creates and he destroys. Which is it going to be? That's what, at the end of the page, that's what it asks. And like my grandmother, when she would frequently say something that we could not quite get the source, she'd say, a little birdie told me. We know that statement. It's over and over again. Little birdie told me. Well, this little birdie is the Venus formula that started the whole thing off for me at age 5. And I don't know if I think I have it. Yes, I do. And we showed it originally. And of course, I did it in crayon and pencil. And I did it, but my father came up and he said, I want you to turn off the lights. And I said, Dad, I'm not done yet. He said, I don't care. It's time. So we turned off the lights. When he retreated downstairs, I waited for a while. Then I took out my dump truck, which had batteries in it, put the lights on, finished my drawing, but I made one mistake. I put a dump truck away and everything else, but I left my drawing of my mother's easel. And of course her precious artwork was on there, and if any of the crayon pieces or anything had gotten on it, it could have destroyed the whole thing for her, so I got hell. Anyway, that's it. That's the dove descending right there, and that's what's in this thing because it is a formula. And this, by the way, even though I did not want it used, because it just was a weather pattern. It's not the way the design was that I saw at 5 years old, but otherwise everything is just in the same proportion as is indicated, as is indicated right there, and it is proportionally correct. That's it. So we have a decision to make. Do we continue with this madness, or do we try to stem it?
What's our plan from here, Bart? I mean, are we going to show more of your formulas and explain?
Oh, absolutely. I will go into them. But as I said, this one here gives you all you need to know in terms of the direct proof going from the Manhattan Project right through to the Viking. That's it.
Awesome.
You couldn't ask for a more clear demonstration. Reciprocal resonance, the whole 9 yards. I mean, this is proof, and it's proof of the proof. That's the interesting thing.
Thank you, Bart. Thanks
You're
so
welcome.
much. The Boy Scouts are coming in.
I know. I got to get out of here.
But you were great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.